Thank you, Auntie Violet. That was incredibly moving. We are meeting today on many traditional lands around the country, and I want to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of those lands and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present. I would also like to acknowledge others joining us today: the Prime Minister, members of the Commonwealth Women's Cabinet Task Force, the Women's Safety Task Force made up of ministers for women and women's safety from around the country, but most importantly, those joining us today who work on the front line, those who are survivors, those who work in justice systems, and all of you who share our goal to end violence against women and their children. Again, welcome to the National Summit on Women's Safety. We are all here today and tomorrow to work on a plan to chart a path to a future free of gendered violence. In Australia, the statistics on family, domestic and sexual violence are quite plainly shameful. We must remember they are not just numbers on a page, but behind each is a woman with her own story to tell. A mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend and a colleague. Some have joined us for the summit. We're talking of real women who have experienced deep hurt and pain and the enormous challenges of getting their lives back together. We are also talking about people like Armin Abrahimzadeh, who lived through years of violence and abuse at the hands of his father and who will be speaking to you all later today. And women like Grace Tame, who has spoken out so bravely on behalf of all of those who have endured sexual violence and who is also with us at this summit. We're also talking about the lived experiences of domestic violence and sexual assault within different groups: Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, women with disability, migrant and refugee women, and the gender diverse community. To those survivors of family, domestic and sexual violence here today, thank you for being here. Thank you for your courage in sharing experiences and helping us understand the reality of what we're talking about. Along with those who have lived experience of abuse, many who have worked with victims and survivors are also with us. Your experiences will give us important insights into what works, both in helping to support and heal those who've been abused and to stop abuse from happening in the first place. Over the next 2 days, we will be listening as we prepare the next national plan to end violence against women and children. We've seen significant shifts of attitudes towards women at home and in the workplace since the first plan was established in 2010. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge former Prime Minister Julia Gillard and the Premiers and Chief Ministers from around the country who had the foresight to declare we must all be united if we are going to change the dial. We must remain united because we can and must do more. The new national plan will need to recognise the full spectrum of family, domestic and sexual violence, how vast the scale of the problem is and its profound impact on victims. It will need to recognise the effects on mental and physical health of all forms of violence and assault, the ongoing trauma, the traps of economic dependence for women subject to partner violence and the impact on children. The summit discussions are a vital addition to the consultation process for the next national plan. A delegate statement to be presented at the end of day 2 will be crucial input into the development of the next national plan to end violence against women and children. I understand that some of the content that we are discussing over the next 2 days may be distressing, so please reach out if you need support. Anyone watching online can contact the following services at any time: 1800-RESPECT on 1800 373 732 or online. Lifeline by phoning 13 11 14 or online. Men's Line by phoning 13 78 99 78 or online. 1800 Elder Help by phoning 1800 353 374 and from 3 p.m. to midnight, Q-Life by phone on 1800 184 527 or online. It's now my pleasure to invite the Minister for Foreign Affairs. 1800-RESPECT on 1800 373 732 or online. Lifeline by phoning 13 11 14 or online. Men's Line by phoning 13 78 99 78 or online. 1800 Elder Help by phoning 1800 353 374 and from 3 p.m. to midnight, Q-Life by phone on 1800 184 527 or online. It's now my pleasure to invite the Minister for Foreign Affairs and the Minister for Women, Senator Payne, to speak to us.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to my colleague, Senator Anne Ruston, the Minister for Families and Social Services and the Minister for Women's Safety, for her introduction. Can I also thank Auntie Violet Sheridan for her welcome to country. I also want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I am zooming in from today, the Darug people, and also acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women joining us today for this very important summit. May I acknowledge the Prime Minister, ministers including members of the Cabinet Task Force on Women's Safety and Economic Security, the Shadow Minister for Women, the Honourable Tanya Plibersek MP, federal parliamentarians, state and territory women's safety ministers, Commonwealth, state and territory delegates, participants including people with lived experience, frontline service providers, advocates, policymakers, business leaders, academics, and the many other who join us around the country today. I particularly acknowledge the leadership and contribution of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in addressing women's safety issues. A key component of the government's Closing the Gap target is the importance of women's and children's safety to achieving better life outcomes for First Nations people. The National Summit will build on consultations such as those of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Justice Commissioner, Ms June Oscar, AO. June is a proud Bunurra woman from Fitzroy Crossing in Western Australia. Her report, called We Yani Untani, or Women's Voices, calls for a national action plan specifically designed with First Nations women and children in mind. That is in large part what we are here to do. To the many women and children who are victims and survivors of violence, to those who are rebuilding their lives, to those who have lost their lives, your stories are important. Your courage is inspiring, and it drives us to do more. To those working in frontline services, including specialist women's services, I thank you for being here today and for your motivation and dedication, particularly pivoting so quickly throughout the pandemic to ensure you could continue your work in a COVID-safe way. I thank all of you for your continued efforts to advocate for the safety of women and children in this country. It is unfortunate that we can't be in person together for the summit. However, proceeding with a virtual summit ensures this important part of the consultation process for the next national plan goes ahead. It's been a particularly challenging 18 months for all of us in many ways. There has been so much uncertainty. We have all faced much disruption in our lives, including in responding to the health, the social, the economic impacts of COVID-19. As Minister for Women, I meet with and hear from many women and girls across the country. I'm constantly impressed by the resilience and the ingenuity of women, balancing work, homeschooling, caring for children, family and loved ones. For those of you joining us today while balancing these demands, we appreciate your time in being here. There is no place in our community for violence, categorically. The stories we have heard and the stories that many of you have told of violence against women and children are horrifying. And things must change. And this is what this summit is focused on as we discuss the priorities for our next national plan. The need for change is illustrated by these too many stories we have heard, whether this year or before, of abuse, of violence, of coercion or harassment. We hear stories from women that are each unique and yet all too common, and stories from service providers about the complexity of women's experiences and the increasing demand for support. We know how hard it is to tell these stories, and they drive our work and our resolve to do more. While the levels of violence against women are certainly still unacceptable, we know that over the course of the current national plan, there has been greater understanding of violence and that more people are seeking help. As a government, we know it's not enough to just respond to violence after it occurs. If we want to reduce violence, we must prevent it from occurring in the first place. Evidence tells us that attitudes that justify or condone gender inequality are a driver of violence against women. In my many years as a senator, I've seen enormous changes in societal attitudes towards the treatment of women. And in the last couple of years, the conversation and the culture have shifted. To prevent violence and inequality, we must as a society challenge and call out the beliefs and behaviours of disrespect and those that condone or justify and excuse violence and disrespect. We have to encourage role models for the behaviours that we want to see and promote respect in all settings, at work, at school, in the home, in the community and online. As a government, we see it as an important role to foster a culture in which respect, dignity, choice, equality of opportunity and justice are available for all, for women and men, for girls and boys. Prevention has been and must continue to be a priority in our efforts to prevent gender-based violence. That's why we continue to invest, for example, in Stop It at the Start, which demonstrates to all adults and young people that responding to disrespect can be a constructive, liberating and an important way to shape future generations. To support and drive improved outcomes for Australian women, the Prime Minister and I this year announced the establishment of a new federal cabinet task force on women's safety and economic security. The purpose of this task force is about delivering practical, effective outcomes for Australian women. The Cabinet Task Force has played a vital role in developing and delivering the 2021-22 Women's Budget Statement. The statement included $3.4 billion in initiatives to support women across three key pillars: women's safety, women's economic security and women's health. We know that when women are safe, economically secure and healthy, it benefits not just individuals, but families, business and the economy. And it includes a $1.1 billion investment in women's safety as a down payment on the successor to the National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children, 2010-2020. We have a critical opportunity from this summit to build on the successes of the current National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children and the significant investment made by this government. As a government, we're committed to working with you to create this change, and I'm pleased to be able to move to introduce the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. I want to thank the Prime Minister for his establishment and leadership of the Cabinet Task Force on Women's Safety and Economic Security. And I particularly want to thank the Prime Minister for his strong support for this summit, for his participation here today. Prime Minister, we look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you very much, Minister Payne and Minister Ruston, and also thank you, Auntie Violet, for that wonderful welcome to country. And thank you to Maurice and Anne for the wonderful leadership you've provided within my cabinet, and particularly Maurice as co-chair of the task force that is focusing very much on the issues that we're addressing today and over the next few days. I'm very glad to be with you as we continue the Women's Safety Summit, following on from the constructive roundtable discussions held last week. I also want to acknowledge the presence today of so many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and honour the role they play in nurturing culture, country, family, community, right across Australia. I also acknowledge any women and men here who have served our nation in our Defence Forces, and I thank you for your service on behalf of a grateful nation. And I particularly acknowledge the survivors of domestic and sexual violence and who are present with us at this summit. Your lived experience is foundational to informing the development of the next national plan to end violence against women and their children. I want to thank you for participating. I want to thank you for your bravery. This is an extraordinary and important gathering. Like you, I wish it was in person, but we adapt to our times, responding to the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. This summit is a gathering of Australians from many different backgrounds and experiences lived. It is a place for sharing. It is a forum for listening. It is a platform for change. Your stories, your expertise, your experiences are critical to the next national plan. A national plan that seeks to end violence against women and their children. A national plan that builds on the outstanding work of my predecessor, Prime Minister Gillard, who set us on this course more than a decade ago. A bipartisan course, I'd go further, an apartisan course that has taken us through this past more than 10 years and now establishes the platform for us to go further. It's a big goal that we share, and it is a shared goal to end violence against women and their children. No single person has all of the answers, and neither does any single government. But together, well, that's a different story. Together, we can listen, we can learn, and we can make change. We can identify barriers and behaviours, practices and gaps, so that Australia is a safer place for every Australian woman and girl. We can draw on lived experience and research findings through this summit and turn them into meaningful action. And the only way we end violence is to focus our efforts to prevent it from happening in the first place. Primary prevention is a key plank of the current national plan and will continue to be fundamental to our long-term strategy. We need to change behaviours and attitudes so that we stop violence before it starts. Our country must become a place where every woman feels safe and can live free of fear. That's what freedom is. That's every woman's right. But it's far from every woman's reality, as we know. Right now, too many Australian women do not feel safe, and too often they are not safe, and that is not okay. There is no excuse, and sorry doesn't cut it. They are not safe at home. They are not safe at work. In broad daylight, you are not safe. In public space, you are not safe. You are not safe. Here in this place, even this place, where I speak to you from today, I am not always safe. And what started as a conversation about long-standing and serious failings in this very workplace, in this Parliament House, turned into a conversation necessarily about women's experiences everywhere. It's not a new problem, and it's not a simple problem, but Australia does have a problem. While much has changed over the years, too much has stayed the same. There is still an attitude, a culture that excuses and justifies, ignores or condones gender inequality that drives ultimately violence against women. And that's on all of us. Every Australian has a responsibility. I, as Prime Minister, have a responsibility. I, as an Australian, has a responsibility. Parents, schools, sports club, the media, every person, every company, every government has a responsibility. And we have to do better and strive to be better. I don't believe we can talk about women's safety without talking about men, about the way some men think they own women, about the way women are subjected to disrespect, coercion, and violence. This must continue to change, because if not now, when? This is a call to action and a call for change. Every Australian has a part to play in making Australia safe for every woman. Because while governments, together with all of you here today, will continue to develop and deliver programs and policies, and indeed a national plan for the next decade, there will be many, many moments in between. And it is in these moments that every Australian can be making their change, because every day counts. Because every 9 days, a woman is murdered by her current or former partner in Australia. 1 in 4 women experience physical or sexual violence by a current or former intimate partner. 1 in 4. That is a national shame. And this year, we've seen the national conversation focus again on women's safety and addressing all forms of violence against women, including sexual violence and harassment. I've received hundreds of letters and emails from women sharing with me their stories about the violence, including sexual assaults, that they have personally suffered, or sharing their stories of family and friends. Letters from women sharing some of the most anguished and personal experiences of their lives, sometimes sharing things they had scarcely shared with anyone ever before. I want to thank them all for sharing their stories bravely with me, and I want to thank them for trusting me with their stories. And at this point, as Minister Ruston has already said, I want to emphasise that, of course, some of the material I'm about to share and will be shared at this summit is confronting. Minister Ruston mentioned the support services available through the summit, and I urge you to use them if you need to. There was a handwritten letter from Queensland. It came in a small envelope and was written on lined A4 paper in cursive script, running writing, finishing with this shocking reflection. I was raped at 14. I'm now 74 and still suffering. 60 years. 60 years, and not enough has changed. Another woman wrote, this time from New South Wales, about the harassment and assault she suffered from a work colleague. It may sound shocking, she said, but at the time in 1989, I never thought to report this event to the police. Another woman described going to court many years ago, a case where a number of her attackers were eventually found guilty, and she said this of the process: I was put on trial, not the guys who raped me. And describing the visceral nature of the case and its re-traumatisation, she added, if you really want to protect women like you say, she said to me, make it so that women don't have to sit in a witness stand 2 feet away from their attackers and give evidence. The letters and emails reflected on the anguish and lifelong burden of assaults at work, at school, at uni, on a sports team, and at home, where they should have been safer than anywhere else in the world. Assaults that happened at any and every age. Trauma compounded by silence. Through all the letters and emails, I felt that rage, the dread, and the frustration that our culture was not changing. And there was something more. It was quieter. There was fatigue. One letter explained, I'm exhausted just thinking about these things. I'm exhausted making what is now automatic adjustments to my behaviour. I'm exhausted having to try to explain why I'm exhausted. I'm so sick and tired of being scared, she said. Something I've been pondering even more after reading these letters is this. In various ways, we have become a more tolerant and enlightened society over recent decades, that's true. And yet, Australian women still don't feel safe. And indeed, they're not safe. Every day, they are forced to change their own behaviours because men won't. Holding their keys like a weapon, going for their run before it gets dark. Having to say to their friends, message me when you get home. Ignoring innuendo and putting up with the boys' clubs. The foundation of respect for women in Australian society is not what it should be. All of us, but Australian men in particular, carry both private obligations and public duties to build those foundations every day. And so to all who wrote to me, again, I say thank you. The torrent of stories and experiences the collective anger and frustration of women and the outrage in the wider community. All of this, though, is pushing us forward, compelling us to examine what's happening, and is driving change. Change will continue to require action on all fronts: prevention, early intervention, support and recovery. And at this summit, you'll be joined by members of the government, ministers, senators, MPs, and you'll be joined by state and territory governments. Governments of all different political persuasions coming together, as they should, in an bipartisan way to develop what I hope will be another bipartisan national plan. Listening, learning, and informing our actions so that we can continue to build on the existing national plan and build on the many commitments that were made in our budget. Meaningful initiatives, backed by funding, to make a difference in homes and schools and workplaces, communities across our nation. In March, Senator Payne and I launched the Cabinet Women's Task Force, which we co-chair, and which has women's safety and economic security at its very heart. In April, we responded to the Respect at Work report, and last week we passed legislation to implement our response to that report. More than $64 million was committed in the 21-22 budget to support the implementation of the roadmap, including additional legal assistance for specialist lawyers and workplace and discrimination law expertise. And on the 6th of August, National Cabinet considered states and territory responses to the report that I called for. Our response to the Respect at Work inquiry, led by Sex Discrimination Commissioner Kate Jenkins, is about creating a new culture of respectful behaviour in Australian workplaces. It's based on values we all believe in, that unite us: respect, dignity, choice, equality of opportunity, and justice. Preventing and addressing sexual harassment in the workplace is central to boosting women's economic participation. In the May budget, we delivered $3.4 billion in the Women's Budget Statement, with initiatives supporting women's economic security, workforce participation, health and safety. It contained $1.1 billion in a women's safety package, which is the single largest announcement of funding for women's safety of any federal government at any time, and I commend Minister Ruston for her work on that. Now, this includes a 2-year trial to provide immediate financial assistance of up to $5,000 to help women leave violent relationships and rebuild their lives, to continuing phase 3 of the Stop It at the Start advertising campaign to change behaviours and deliver a 4th phase of the campaign, and up to $260 million for a new national partnership agreement with the states and territories to expand the funding of frontline family, domestic and sexual violence support services, contingent on co-funding from the states. Now, this builds on the $130 million already provided to the state and territory governments in 2020 to help support crisis accommodation, frontline services and perpetrator intervention programs as they respond to the pandemic. As Minister Ruston, our Minister for Women's Safety, and Minister Payne, our Minister for Women, and my co-chair of the task force have said, this is a down payment only on the next national plan. It is also important that this plan is connected and integrated with our other national strategies so that the sum of our collective efforts is greater than the parts. For example, in August this year, I launched the Commonwealth Closing the Gap implementation plan, and I thank again Pat Turner for her great leadership and partnership. This plan is a direct result of the national partnership agreement I signed with Pat, with the Coalition of the Peaks. The CTG agreement, Closing the Gap agreement, sees us working in partnership with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representatives, not only to reduce family and domestic violence by 50% by 2031 as we progress towards zero, but on all the priorities identified in the agreement, identified by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people should rightfully determine the best way to close the gap in our work together on this key issue, and that is what we're doing. So what comes next? Well, that's in all of our hands. All of us here today will be among the architects of the next national plan. And I agree with those of you who said in the roundtables last week that we can't arrest our way out of the problem of violence against women. I agree that we absolutely must redouble our efforts to prevent violence against women. As our watch reminds us, violence against women is preventable, and we can and must change the story. But we also must address the fact that too many find it too difficult to seek justice. This is frustrating. As mentioned, one of the critical issues that I saw in reading and replying to all of those letters and emails that I referred to earlier was the intolerable interactions women have been having with the justice system. And that's why in this year's Women's Budget Statement, we very deliberately set aside funding to strengthen criminal justice responses to sexual assault, sexual harassment and coercive control. And I thank the Attorney, Minister Cash, for her great work in pulling that together with Minister Ruston. With funding of $4.7 million, the Attorney General has already commenced a work program in partnership with states and territories to achieve this. This will focus not simply on increasing the rates of conviction, but supporting the needs of traumatised victim survivors and increasing consistency of criminal justice responses to sexual assault. It will examine ways to make perpetrators accountable, while at the same time supporting victim survivors through this very difficult process. This work will also look at improving definitions around coercive control and ways to ensure the justice system is less traumatic for women when they seek justice. This must include building capability in the criminal justice system to better support victim survivors of sexual assault, as well as striving for consistent outcomes in the prosecution of sexual assault offences. Women should not feel like they are in trial, when in fact it's someone else facing the courts. I'm determined that we work together to improve outcomes and protections for victim survivors of violence, including sexual assault, in the justice system. The combined effort of the existing national plan to reduce violence against women and children is a testament to all governments' long-term bipartisan commitment to working together. And it is one we seek to emulate in an even more ambitious way as we now develop the next national plan to end violence against women and children. This recognises that while we have a massive challenge ahead, there is no acceptable level of violence. As I said earlier, there is no excuse and sorry doesn't cut it. The work on coercive control reminds us that violence against women takes so many forms. It manifests in many ways, and that our understanding of it evolves and grows so we can respond more effectively. We are also working across governments to develop a common national understanding of coercive control and its impacts in order to build awareness, which helps inform that prevention and early intervention activity. Coercive control has all too sadly become very prominent in our minds in recent years. Our understanding of violence, the physical and non-physical tactics, is better than when the existing national plan was developed. So I look forward to hearing the outcomes of the Alter the Course panel discussion this afternoon around perpetrator interventions, coercive control and early intervention. There's much work to be done there. While the next national plan will remain and maintain a focus on prevention, early intervention and on vital crisis support, it must also address the anguish and burden of undisclosed and unresolved trauma. As the stories I recounted to you remind us, trauma stays with us. The next national plan must go a step further to not only prevent, intervene and provide support in times of crisis, but go well beyond that. It must look to recovery over years, decades, 60 years, as we heard, and more. Through this summit, we can help to identify ways to better support victim survivors as they rebuild their lives, as they physically, mentally and emotionally address the trauma, as they build new lives, by, for example, developing new skills for future employment and steps to achieve financial security and independence, empowering. Recovery is so important as women reimagine their future and the future for their children, of which they're so passionate. Seeking justice must not add to the trauma and victim survivors must be supported to work through their trauma sooner, guided by their own goals. So in closing, we come to this summit with an open mind, an ambitious spirit, encapsulated by the target to end, not reduce, but end violence against women and children. That's our goal. Our country must continue to change, and there is much we must continue to do. This is everyone's business. Men have a large part to play, as do families, friends, businesses, sporting organisations, media, education providers, community organisations, prime ministers. I want all the women and every girl in this nation to live without fear. That's liberty. I want their humanity, their dignity, their innate worth as a human being, and the freedoms to which they're entitled to be respected. I want all women and girls to walk in this world, in our nation, confident that they are safe to live the life they want to live, that they choose to live. I know everyone joining us for this summit wants the same thing. We will go much further, you know, when we can all appreciate that we are all, from whatever place we're coming from to this summit, earnestly trying to achieve that same goal. This is what we share. This summit recognises that we have all come here together for the same purpose, a shared purpose with a shared determination. So many have come to this summit with the stories of their experience, whether that be the brutality and disrespect that they have suffered, or the selfless service they have been engaged in for so long to help and protect and restore those who have suffered, and their frustration and their disappointment that they have endured in offering that selfless service. We respect and acknowledge that perspective. It's so important. It helps us understand the way forward. And then there are others of us who have come here with open ears and open hearts to learn from your experiences and to make the changes we need to make for the better. So let us gather together in that sense of unity, in that sense of shared respect for each other, for what has brought us all to the table, acknowledging that's why we're each here. And let us use this good faith as the basis for our discussions, and recognise and allow that good faith that has brought us together to provide the opportunity we are all seeking to move this forward through our participation here in this summit, and to enable us to focus on what we need to do. So, over these 2 days, and indeed the roundtables before, we want to hear from you, your perspectives. I want to hear from you, your perspectives, your ideas, your wisdom for how we go forward on this together. Because with your help, we can create that national plan that sets a course for a country and a culture of Australians that does not like violence in the future, one that honours respect. That's our task. So I look forward to the days ahead, and I want to thank everyone for their patient listening today. Thank you.